up, guys? Coach Thomas here with Freebell, and we're going to start a new video series. This video series is called the Freebell Starter Series. It'll give us some time to kind of go through some individual movements that we do with the Freebell, dive into some progressions that I use with my clients when they're first using the implement, and get you moving properly right from the start as soon as you get your hands on one of the Freebell weights. Okay, the Freebell is a very unique tool, and it honestly came out of some unique circumstances. I was an Olympic weightlifting athlete and an Olympic weightlifting coach. I loved the snatch and clean and jerk, and honestly, throughout the years, I wasn't able to push those weights as heavy as I once was. And I really enjoyed single arm implements, but something was missing between that technical aspect of the snatch and the clean and jerk, and then what I was doing with the single arm implement. And a lot of that really came down to the rotating handle. The rotating handle of a barbell allows you to keep the bar extremely close in a straight line throughout your pull, where you can rotate late, as opposed to if it was a fixed handle and you would kind of have to U the weight around, having to rotate the weight, like you see with like a dumbbell or kettlebell. I wanted to create an implement that utilized that spinning handle to give me the same feel and some of the same requirements that I saw out of Olympic weightlifting. And honestly, it's grown a lot from there, the type of movements. But the core of it was really some of these big power movements. Now, we're going to go through the clean today for a couple different reasons. For one, it's the most asked about movement, right? And a lot of that has to do with the fact that they just want to be able to get the weight to their shoulder in a safe and proper manner, because there's so many movements that we utilize in the front rack position, whether that simply to be going overhead, if we're doing front rack squats or lunges, or if we're doing the clean itself. So when we look at the Freebell, if this is your first time seeing it, it's a bilateral offset weight with a rotating handle. The bilateral really allows us that free-flowing motion, right? There's no implement in the way that would contact us like a kettlebell. And that really allows us a little bit more free range of motion with our movements. It is offset weights though. That offset weight adds a really dynamic feel to it. It also has a stability and tempo and timing requirement. That is set off by having that offset weight. And then the rotating handle is really what brings it together. The rotating handle is what allows it all to flow. It also allows some of our movements, like the snatch and clean and jerk, to be a little bit different line of pull. So when we think about the clean, we're going to really think about this being a leg-driven pull, because we're trying to keep the weight as straight as possible. Okay, so the first thing I do whenever I'm showing somebody how to do a clean is I just talk to them about doing a pull and keeping the weights down. Okay, a lot of times if you're accustomed to different weights, the first thing we do is we hinge at the hip, we push the weight out, and it gets a little bit of swing on it with the Freebell. So what we want to do is we're just going to keep this in a front-facing position, and all we're going to do is we're going to go from the bottom and we're going to pull straight up the body. Elbows nice and high, the weight stays close, and you can see all I'm trying to do is get that feel of what it's like when the weight is down. Okay, as you can see here, if I'll turn sideways, weight is down, nice straight pull, right? As opposed to if I pulled it out in front, if I started here and I pulled it out in front, you can see how that weight kicks. Okay, getting accustomed to pulling that weight straight, right? Keeping the elbow nice and high and keeping that bell down will set you up for success right away when we're doing something like a clean. Okay. The next thing I always do is I do a floating clean. Okay. There's a couple different clean variations that we'll talk about. Okay. There is a muscle clean, and that is a clean where we pull all the way up to the shoulder, and there is no rebending of the knees to go under the weight. There's a power clean, and that's where we're actually pulling under and we're catching in a power position. Okay. Sometimes we'll do a power with a jump. Okay. So I would call the first one a power no feet, right? And then a straight power clean is where there's an actual jump and a landing. That adds a little bit of complexity to the movement because you're having to time up when your feet hit the ground with when you receive the weight. And then we'd have the same two variations as we go to squat cleans, right? We would do a no feet where we can just feel the weight all the way in, and then we could do an actual jump, which is probably the most complex movement, right? Because we're pulling underneath the weight, we're having to time up the catch with the feet, and when we receive the free belt in the front rack position, and we're putting it all together in one fluid motion. All right, so now we'll get into the floating muscle clean, right? So if we think about the muscle clean, we're going to be going from the bottom position, okay? And then we are going to go just to the shoulders to what I call as a floating position. A floating position is where we keep the weight away from the body, right? And what this really does is it forces us to do a proper pull and catch in the receiving position without just utilizing sitting the weights against our body. Sometimes when we use the contact of a weight against the body, we're kind of hiding some deficiencies in our pull. When we're in a floating position, there really is nowhere to hide. The free bell will give us that feedback on our pull and our catch every single rep. And then we can work to actually have that contact once we figure out what the pull is supposed to feel like right off the bat. So if we go to the floating position, I'll rotate here. I always start my clean in a what I call as a neutral position, so straight in line with the body, and that's just to make it a half turn closer to our in position. So our in position is going to be in the floating almost like a curl, right? So palms are going to be facing you. I'm thinking about keeping that forearm straight up and down, and that is my receiving position. So like I said, floating, there's no contact between the body and the bottom of the bell. So if I pull up here, I'm thinking up and rotate. Up and rotate. And you can see there's a delay. I'm not just pulling with my arm, so I'm not just doing this, right? I'm pulling here, right? And then I'm carrying that momentum to that in range position, right? So I'll do it in a couple again. If I go from the bottom here, pull, right? And you can see how everything is nice and smooth. Now, if I was to over pull it, you'd be able to see, right? Over pull. That means I'm just pulling it up as hard as I can. And I'm not really thinking about the timing. I'm wanting it to catch at its highest point. So this really forces you to control the power output, like how fast you're pulling the weight. You're pulling it the appropriate amount to get it to the front rack position. No higher, no lower. This is where the free bell has a little bit more of like a coordination component to it as opposed to some of the other free weight implements. So if I'm here and I pull, right? So I'm working that position. You can start really light. Your whole goal is for it to be as stable as possible in that front rack floating position. After that, we're going to a power. And this to me is the best movement with the free bell if you're learning, right? Because now I'm adding the implement of pulling under the bar. This is really what ties in the free bell to more of like the Olympic weights and the requirement of using an Olympic barbell for weightlifting. In weightlifting, you're really thinking about pulling it up to its highest point when you're in the elongated position, meaning that you're nice and tall, arms are straight, and then everything that includes the bend, everything that includes the bend of the arms, everything that includes the bend of the knee and the ankle and the hip is actually you going underneath the weights. That's really where the magic happens with the free bell. So same exact thing, we're gonna go from a floating position, so where the weight's gonna be right out in front, and I'm gonna do the same pull, and now I'm just gonna pull under it. I'm gonna pause in my power position, and I'm shooting to catch it in this front rack position, in this floating, and have the bell be as stable as possible. So if I go from here, I'm thinking straight up, under, straight up, under, right? You can see that little snap. In slow motion, it's gonna look something like this, right? You're gonna go up, 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 up here, right? And then everything from here is you going under, 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 utilizing the rotation, catch, and then receive, okay? Up, 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 extend, and then you're pulling under, receive, okay? So we'll do a couple different angles with the Freebell. So if I'm here, right, catch, catch, okay? The floating position is great, like we talked about, right? We're not just utilizing having contact with our chest, with our shoulder to stabilize the weight. I'm being forced to have a proper pull and proper position throughout the whole entire lift to make it stable in a catch position and allow that free bell to rotate, right? That feedback is important, right? The feedback will tell you what positions possibly could be wrong, right? A couple things that could be going wrong. You could be swinging the weight out in front, right? Probably the most common thing we see is somebody going from here, they swing the weight out, and then they let it come back in, right? So they let it come out away from the body here, swing, right? And you're gonna have that swing as opposed to straight and under, okay? The other thing is over pulling it. Sometimes we'll just pull it too hard, right? Be here, right? So I had a pretty straight pull, but I over pulled it. And what happened was the momentum of the weight, as I pulled it up here, I pulled so hard that this weight started to kick a little bit. And then when I went to the receiving position, I got that rotation, right? So some of that has to do a little bit with the coordination and the timing of the catch, okay? Make it a little bit more difficult, we'll go to a power with a catch. So we're gonna actually do a jump and a catch along with receiving it. So we're adding the feet movement in. So if we go from here, go here, jump, back down, here, jump, right? Same deal, boom, okay? And you can see, like I pulled just to the highest position, I utilize that rotating handle, I get the feedback from the offset way of the bell, and I catch it in a nice stable position. Those two things go along with both our squat clean and our squat clean no feet, and then our squat clean with feet. And I'll just go through a couple of those real quick. So we'll do squat clean with no feet, right? So we'll be here, highest point, catch. Right? Now, because I'm using the same weight that I just did with the power, I have to take a little bit off that. Theoretically, be able to do more weight when I'm doing the squat position, right? So the squat clean, of course, is our most efficient type of clean that you can do. Do the same thing with the jump here, boom, catch, catch, okay? Now, after you have done a lot of the floating position, you can start to make contact. Now, I typically have people do an assisted clean before they do a one arm against the body. What that does really is it just gives people a little bit of peace of mind when they're pulling against their shoulder. So all you're gonna do is you're gonna do the same exact pull, and now we're gonna pull into the front rack position. The free bell is unique in the fact that if I'm here, right, as I get the weight closer, because it has that rotating handle, I can get that weight extremely close to the body because this is free flowing, okay? That's a great thing if you're doing it properly. If you do it improperly, it will try to kick back and get you. So as long as we're receiving it in this stable position, right here, and then the last movement is just that movement into the body, it's gonna stay stuck to the body, okay? And then you'll have that nice catch position to where all it's doing is really resting on your chest. You're not using your chest and shoulder as like an impact to receive it, okay? So I'm gonna do an assisted. So I'll start out, I'm just gonna go right to the power clean. So if I go from the bottom here, I'm gonna go to the catch position, and I'm gonna utilize my opposite hand as a receiving point, okay? So you can see, right? And I'm just using my hand here. Here, catch. Here, catch. And that just helps stabilize a little bit in that receiving position. right? To give you a little bit of comfort as you're going through the progression. The last one would obviously be just a standard one-arm clean. And what this does is this allows you to do just the single arm. It also allows you to work towards your double arm when you're doing 2 at a time on your cleans. So we're gonna do the same idea, right? Just keep the bar close, rotate late, keep it nice and stable, and at the last moment, everything squeezes into the chest, but we're not gonna use the assisted arm, okay? So if I go right from here, boom. You can see very little movement. Up, in, right? Just that little rotation late, right? There's just that little bit of movement. You can see just like a little touch to your shoulder, but everything is straight to the body. Rotate late, and then touch, right? That little, like, it should just be like maybe ½ inch away from the body to where as you just bring that weight in, it comes into contact with your shoulder to where it just helps you stabilize in that proper front rack. This front rack is a really strong and stable position. It is exactly the same if we would think about the front rack in a barbell. I'm just turning the wrist so I'm palms down. I hope that progression helped. I would spend a lot of time in those floating positions. It's a great way to learn the rotation and the receiving position of the clean and then build towards doing those cleans so you can have some great workouts with the Freebell. We'll see you next time.